All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the Million Dollar Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Mario. And Mario, this is crazy because I'm just now realizing this, that you and I have already talked before. We've had conversation, we've done all this, and I have never asked you, how do you pronounce your last name? So,
Well, if you want the Italian version, then it would be Lanzarotti.
okay.
If you want the English version, if there is one, you could say Lanzarotti.
Very good. Okay. All right. So, and I'll tell you that's an interesting thing because it once again just goes to show the power of relationships, which is what this podcast is all about. Is that you and I made this great connection through a mutual friend who introduced us, and we just started having conversations. And I was like, man, Mario, I would love to interview you for the podcast, and here we are for that. And yet, and of course now reconnecting, it just feels like we've known each other for years, and so and that is testament to the power of relationships. And I have long believed that as entrepreneurs, relationships are our most valuable asset. Everything else stems from that. And I know you believe that too. What I'd like to do is just kind of start off by turning it over to you, Mario, and having you set some context. And so let everybody know, kind of what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work that you do. And we'll just kind of start there.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited, and I know that it will be packed with valuable, actionable items for your listeners, because that's my intention, to serve today powerfully. And so a little bit about myself. As you have said, my name is Mario Lanzarotti. I run a high-performance coaching business, and I work with entrepreneurs, business leaders, CEOs, really the nature of a high performer, the kind of people that when you come into a room and they tell their story, you either have the people that say, wow, I love that, or you have the people that say, huh, come on, be realistic. That's a bit too much. Right? So I serve the big dreamers, the ones that are not afraid to be a pioneer, the ones to go out and create their own way of living life, innovators. And so what I do is I bring two worlds into my coaching. One is sound business strategy, which I think you have mastered beautifully, because it's all about the power of mastering relationships. Because as entrepreneurs, what we need to understand, how do we leverage our time better? Time is a limited resource. Everybody has 24 hours a day. But what we do with that 24 hours is significantly different for all of us. And so you see the typical entrepreneur that wears all the hats in the business that he or she isn't supposed to be doing. And so that, to me, is often a case of the entrepreneur doesn't know what high leverage actions are. And so we look at the strategy of the individual. How is he or she showing up in the business? What kind of activities is he or she focusing on? And how much of an ROI are these actions producing? Now, that's on the very obvious space, pretty much, that all business coaches is what happens here. But the magic, really, I find, is when you look at the other part, and that is where we look at you as a whole human being. We look at your mindset. We look at your thoughts. We look at how are you managing your energy. And so, you have the typical idea. You have the entrepreneur that goes to a workshop, to a seminar, joins the mastermind, reads the book, and says, oh, yeah, I should just, take this action. Very simple, very straightforward. And you might be doing it for 1 or 2 or 3 days, but then something happens. And you see that entrepreneurs are not they're not consistent with that new behavior that will create the new desired result. And so I really dive deep into the psychology, into the behavioral psychology of the entrepreneur, of the business leader, to make sure that the person is operating in their highest potential. And, to give you a little story, one of my recent clients who joined me, he's a very successful SaaS entrepreneur. He runs a cold email agency. He's published books, very successful entrepreneur. And he came to me with his new business, and he wanted me to help him scale the business. And so he came to me, and the business was tanking. Growth was at a still stand. And so this will be interesting for you, Kevin, because it's all about relationships. And so I asked him, why is it not working? Well, I said, well, people aren't really taking the actions that we agreed that they would take. And I said, why are they not doing that? And he couldn't give me an answer. And so we dug deeper, and we found out that his challenge is he wants to be Mr. Nice Guy. He wants to be nice to everybody. And so with that comes the lack of clear direction, the lack of boundaries, the lack of letting people do the work that they're supposed to be doing. And if they're not doing, then there are consequences. So we worked through all of these issues. And guess what? In 3 weeks after we worked together, the business grew by 600%.
Wow.
600%.
Wow.
Why? Because now everything is working in harmony. Right? When you have an instrument and you play it the way that it's supposed to be, you have beautiful harmony. You have a symphony. But if the instrument isn't tuned properly, if it's out of shape, if there are parts of it that are broken, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get the beautiful symphony that you want. And so this also leads me to what you asked me, what inspires me most about this work? See, what inspires me most about this work is that I get to work with people that are already performing at a high level, but just a small adjustment in their thinking creates magnificent results. And then to see how someone goes from a level 3 to a level 6 in such a short amount of time, and what becomes possible just opens my heart, because that's where possibility lives. That's where excitement and growth and transformation truly exists.
Yeah. Wow. Man, that resonates so much with me, Mario. And, I have learned over the years the importance of having extreme clarity on who we can best serve,
Yeah.
and because in fact, I was just talking with a gal this morning, that we were talking about how, man, we just love the guy that you mentioned. I just love everybody. I want everybody to play and get along well together, and I want the best for everybody. and yet I cannot effectively serve everybody. And
Yes.
we have to get extremely clear on exactly where is our lane, who can we serve best, and focus that, because that not only allows us to do our best work, it allows us to be at our best so we don't get burnt out on the work that we do either. And so, yeah, man, what a huge thing. And, the more entrepreneurs that understand that, the more impact they're going to make when they really, can get that clarity on who they should be serving, and, how they should be serving them, all of that kind of stuff. Huge.
Yeah.
So now that we've got a little bit of context set, I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of our listeners. So have you ever been introduced, Mario, to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Mario, I am just really excited to have you share your story, your experience around this topic of relationships.
That's a very profound question to ask, and I think it's a beautiful question, Kevin. So thank you for that. And I will go so far to say that if it wasn't for this person, I'm not sure I would be sitting here in front of you today. I'm not sure I would be alive, because there was a time in my life when I was 21 years old. I was on my way to becoming a pilot in Germany. I was at the Lufthansa Flight Training Academy, and I was there for 1.5 years, and I became severely depressed. I was in chronic back pain pretty much all day long. And I went down a very dark path that led me to contemplating suicide for about 2 weeks. And on YouTube, I found, through what I call divine intervention, Les Brown and Tony Robbins. And so that was the first time that I was witness to what someone that comes into your life, whether the person is really there or virtually, doesn't really matter in that case, what it can do for you. And it opened up my mind to the idea that failure is not the end of life, but failure is really just a launching pad to greater depths of growth, of transformation, and can be a story which I can use to help other people. So that was the first time in my life. And after that, I encountered many mentors that guided me at a young age to take responsibility for the kind of life that I want to live. But I want to fast forward that to actually, was it 2 years ago? It was like 1.5, 2 years ago. So last year in April, I gave my TEDx talk, which has now crossed over 1 million views. And
Wow.
the reason I got this talk is I'm part of an organization called the Bellwether Alliance. And in this organization, you meet a lot of incredible human beings. He's an NFL player. His name is Reggie Walker. He's an ex-NFL player. And so we met through Zoom, just like you and I connected. And he asked me about my story, and we had a lovely conversation. And then at the end of the conversation, as the custom goes, he asked me, what can I do for you? What do you need? And I'm like, do you know any podcast hosts where I could share my message? And he's, or do you know any places where I could, give a speech, something like that? And he's like, how about a TEDx talk? And I'm like, wait, what? He's joking, right? And I'm like, in disbelief, sure, that would be incredible. And in my mind, I'm thinking he's going to say, it's only $20,000 for you. And I'm already debating with myself, even though he hasn't said anything. Yeah, it's probably worth it. You should say yes. So I asked, well, is there a catch? Does it cost anything? And he's like, no. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? And it's like, yeah, you're in. If you want it, you're in. And I'm like, what? What? Are you serious? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And I'm like, but you don't even know me. It's that, well, I've heard enough today. I see that your story is incredible, and what you've done and what you share with the world is needed. So you're in. And I'm like, wow. And that was a single conversation that helped me with that. So that's how I got into the TEDx speech game as first place. Then also through the Bellwether Alliance, I met another person. His name is Mark S.A. Smith. First time I meet the guy, we hit it off right away on Zoom, connect super deeply about business, about spirituality, and he sort of becomes my go-to mentor. We've had several meetings. I start writing my speech. I finish the whole speech. I read it to my fiance. She's like, I love it. It's great. I'm like, any other feedback? She's like, I don't really know what to tell you, other than it's great. It's like, okay, I get that. And she's like, why don't you ask your mentor, Mark? And I'm like, immediately I feel like, ooh, that's too much receiving. I'm not so sure about that. And so eventually I muster up the courage and I send him a message and say, hey, if you have maybe 5 minutes, could you just peek over my speech if I send it to you and give me some feedback, nothing crazy. And he responds to me, when do you have 4 hours? We will workshop the whole thing. And I'm like, wait, what? And I'm like, how much is that going to cost me? And he's like, nothing. I was like, I believe in you and I believe in your message. I want to do this for you. And he took my speech from here to over the clouds, the cloud limit. I mean, extraordinary improvement. And those are two people that have radically impacted my life from a place of unconditional, selfless love. They have never asked for anything in return from me.
Yeah. Wow. What an amazing example, and a testament to the power of relationships and connecting and creating relationships with the right people. So I want to, I love asking this question because it really, like if we haven't like conveyed that to the listeners already, we'll definitely do it here now. So if you think about any of these relationships that you've had, with Les, with Tony, with Reggie, with Mark, and you've kind of alluded to this in sharing these experiences already, but we'll get really granular with this. And so if you look at any one of these relationships and what has transpired and a specific, excuse me, really big impact that has come from that you know, hands down, would have never happened if not for your relationship with that person, what's one thing that comes right to the top of your mind?
Ask and you shall receive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's the number one thing. Like it sounds so simple, and it is really,
Yeah,
but it's profound.
it
Because
is.
for entrepreneurs, asking for support without paying for it is incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult. And it was for me most of my life. And when I experienced this firsthand, that when you ask, there are people that will help. You just got to ask enough times and also be clear. Eventually people will respond because people are inherently good. I truly believe that. And those two things, ask and you shall receive, and people are truly good at the core, has changed my life in so many ways.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I will tell you, you know, my personal experience. I mean, you know, for most of my life, or for all my life, I've just been this giving, generous guy. I love the feeling that comes from giving to someone who just truly appreciates that. And like that is one of the most amazing feelings ever. And yet, for most of my life, I was not good at all when it came to receiving, and God forbid, asking for what I want. I would never do that because I didn't want to bother people. I didn't want to inconvenience them, whatever, you know. And and it wasn't until about 11 years ago where a close friend of mine just kind of was just completely candid. He's like, Kevin, he's like, do you realize that by being the way that you are, he's like, you know, he's like, you love the feeling that it comes from giving to somebody else. But he's like, by being the way that you are, he's like, you are depriving others from having that same feeling that you just told me was the best feeling in the world. He's like, who are you to deprive them from that? And until then, I had never looked at it that way before, Mario. And, you know, ever since then, 11 years now, I have been intentionally focused on I am going to be continually spreading my wings and flexing my receiving muscle and just keep getting better at that and knowing full well that I am also this giving generous person that's going to continue doing that as well. I'm going to continue helping others to the best of my ability. And I will tell you that by continually, you know, I don't know that I give myself a 10 because I think there's always room for improvement, but I would certainly rank myself on the receiving scale. I'm going to give myself like an 8 or 9. I'm up there now. I'm up there, you know, and it has changed everything. That has been an absolute game changer in my life. And this podcast would have not come if I hadn't opened myself to that, you know. And so that is such a huge thing. And like, look at you. I mean, getting this TEDx talk that now has 1 million views. I mean, my gosh, you know, how many lives? Well, we know 1 million plus people have been impacted because of that TEDx talk, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, man, that's huge. That's huge. I mean, kudos to you. And so, well, Mario, I just really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation today. And you know, for anybody listening to this, that might be like going, dang, TEDx talk, 1 million views, and like, man, Kev, I am really intrigued by this Mario guy. I love the way he shows up. I just really, you know, I mean, how can they find out more about what you're doing? How can they you got any resources or what have you, website, what have you? How can they find out more about what you're doing, Mario?
Yes. So before we go there, I want to add something because I think you make a very powerful point. You know, I was asked, how did you get your TEDx talk to 1 million views and more? And, they asked me, what was your agency? What ad strategy did you use? And I'm like, I didn't have an agency. I had no ad strategy. I didn't really have a sound strategy. In hindsight, I went back and I looked at what happened. And so what happened is a lot of people knew about it, a lot of my associates, friends, colleagues, clients, partners, and there was a great sense of anticipation. When is it coming out? When is it coming out? Right? Because I was talking about it on my social media. When it came out, people shared it so willingly. It spread like wildfire. Yes, it was a very high quality speech, and my strategy was kindness. My strategy to grow and to scale still is today, is in my business, it's kindness. Because when you come to a conversation with me, and I said this in the beginning of the podcast, my intention is to serve you. I don't come in with the idea, what do I need to say to Kevin so that Kevin will open up his network to me? No, I let go of that because that's an egoic construct that's coming from a place of fear. And so I just show up, serve you in whatever way I can. And sometimes that means just attentively listening to you. And so you will then naturally ask me, what can I do for you? And if you don't, that's fine too. I'm not attached to that. So I use that strategy to blow up my TEDx talk, and I use it to grow my business with clients. Service, service, service. Don't sell, serve. And so this is the philosophy that I also install into entrepreneurs because it creates longevity. It creates a sense of abundance in the way that you're operating your business. And the most beautiful thing is you get to enjoy the journey of entrepreneurship with all its ups and downs from day one, because you're not showing up to win a certain outcome. You're showing up to serve every day through your services, through your business. And that just makes the whole thing so much more powerful. So if you want to learn more about me, connect with me, I always like when people listen to these conversations and they reflect on them. And I'm not here to convince you of anything. I would love to hear from you. Which part stood out to you? Which part didn't? Share it with me. You can find me on all the social media platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. Just type in my name, Mario Lanzarotti. That's Mario. My last name, Lanzarotti. And my website is mariolanzarotti.com. And yeah, I would love to hear from you which part of the conversation resonated and didn't resonate.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that, because you're right. When we just show up with the intention to contribute, to serve, to help, to pour into others, with no agenda, what ultimately comes from that will be so much bigger than anything we could have imagined anyways, and it might not be that it's a specific, because I'm talking with this person that I receive back from this person, but it just comes. And the fact that have got 100 views of this video completely organically is just phenomenal. And it just once again speaks to the power of relationships. And so, Mario, thanks again, man. Thanks again for taking the time to have this conversation. Really appreciate it. Any last thing you want to share before we call it a wrap?
Thank you, Kevin, for having me on. And to underline what you said about relationships, life is a relationship. Nothing in life is the way that it is. Everything is the way that we relate to it. And when we understand how relating happens through intention, then we become the master of all relationships in life. And when that is the case, no door will remain closed to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Mario, once again, thanks so much. Really appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me on.
Absolutely.